Industrial farming is the single biggest destructive force on the planet today.
Where am I complicit in a war against the earth?
There's a famous Henry Kissinger quote, which apparently he didn't even write.
Control oil, and you control nations. Control food, and you control people.
Regardless of who wrote it, it's a succinct way to explain what's happening in several nations on different timescales, but for all the same reason and orchestrated by the same people.
Your Royal Highnesses, Your Excellencies, Lords, Ladies and Gentlemen, please welcome His Royal Highness.
Where am I complicit in a war against the earth?
Indian Point Power Plant, they began talking that night about violence.
There is an uncertain future for a strategically important island nation where economic crisis has now been followed by political upheaval.
I want you to stay angry. I want you to stay frustrated.
Who cares if our children and grandchildren curse us?
With a growing global population creating ever-increasing demand on the planet's finite resources, the most emitting and polluting industries. They include energy, agriculture.
Our planet has been wounded by our actions.
I say no, you say nukes. No, no. I say no, you say nukes. No, no.
A new industrial revolution.
Africa, if everybody's raising living standards to the point where everybody's got a car and everybody's got air conditioning and everybody's got a big house, well, the planet will boil over.
In the years after World War II, the tides of independence swept across the Indian subcontinent, ending centuries of British colonial rule. India, after a prolonged struggle, achieved its independence on August 15, 1947. Just a few months later, Sri Lanka, then known as Ceylon, just off the coast of India, followed suit. Within 4 years, Sri Lanka found itself with a surplus of rubber for trade export and a shortage of rice to feed its people. Initially, Sri Lanka attempted to negotiate with the United States for a loan of $50 million and for favorable prices for rubber exports and rice imports, but failed. In 1949, the year after Sri Lanka gained its independence from the British Empire, the People's Republic of China emerged out of decades of civil and world war. Despite the fact that capitalist and communist nations had just worked together to defeat Hitler's army in World War II, a new era, dubbed the Cold War, set in. Fledgling nations like Sri Lanka had to carefully navigate the new emerging geopolitical tensions. The story of Sri Lanka's diplomatic bond with the People's Republic of China begins in 1952, with the inception of the Rubber Rice Pact, marking a new era of cooperation and mutual benefit. Faced with an unprecedented crisis, Sri Lanka needed rice to feed its population and struggled to find a market for its rubber exports. After failing to secure aid from the United States, Minister of Commerce R.G. Senanayake discovered that China, isolated by international sanctions and in need of rubber, was eager to trade. Recognizing the potential, Senanayake swiftly negotiated the Ceylon-China Trade Agreement in 1952. This landmark pact saw China supply rice to Sri Lanka in exchange for rubber, alleviating immediate crises for both nations and laying the foundation for a lasting diplomatic relationship. History has shown that this was a deal that transcended a simple exchange of goods. In January of 2022, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited Sri Lanka to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the Rubber Rice Pact.
The pact demonstrated our national spirit in the fight against hegemony and power politics. China and Sri Lanka are good friends standing together with mutual assistance. Sri Lanka is an important part of China's Belt and Road cooperation in South Asia.
The 1952 deal was followed up in 1957 by Sri Lanka being one of the first countries to recognize the People's Republic of China over Chiang Kai-shek's Taiwan. Since then, China has helped bankroll Sri Lankan development, spending over $8 billion to finance airports, schools, ports, irrigation, coal power plants, and industrial parks, with major investments beginning well before the official start of the Belt and Road Initiative.
China will firmly promote high-quality Belt and Road cooperation and help Sri Lanka realize its vision of prosperity and glory. We should further promote multilateralism, adhere to openness, inclusiveness, and mutual benefit, oppose isolation, conservatism, and zero-sum games, and jointly build a community with a shared future for mankind.
It has been a long-time reality that stability in Sri Lanka hinges on their access to food, whether produced locally or imported from trade partners. In August of 1973, Henry Kissinger wrote to Richard Nixon,
"The possibility of a large-scale famine is not as great in Sri Lanka as in other South Asian countries, such as Bangladesh and parts of India. However, severe food shortages in Sri Lanka could cause widespread disorder there, and perhaps a repetition of the island-wide uprising that almost brought down Mrs. Bandaranaike's government in 1971. In short, Mrs. Bandaranaike is concerned that serious food scarcities, added to already existing inflation, shortages, and other economic difficulties, might lead to unmanageable political instability."
And in March of 2022, political instability is exactly what they got. In 2019, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa announced his intention to transition Sri Lanka to fully organic agriculture over the course of 10 years. Then suddenly in April of 2021, Rajapaksa declared the country had to quit chemical fertilizers cold turkey.
It gives me great pleasure to address you today at the agroecology event of the United Nations Committee on World Food Security. In April of this year, the government of Sri Lanka banned the import of artificial fertilizers, pesticides, and weedicides. My government's decision to ban imports of artificial fertilizer and agrochemicals will therefore enable a long-needed national transition to a healthier and more ecologically sound system of organic agriculture.
By June, international bodies and NGOs were pledging full support of Sri Lanka's abrupt fertilizer ban in favor of organic methods.
British High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, Sarah Holton, Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, commended the President's decision to safeguard the environment by focusing on the use of organic fertilizers.
Sustainable organic agriculture is not new to us, but a historic practice we seek to revitalize with new scientific advances and management techniques in collaboration with our partners. I am confident that Sri Lanka will be able to sustainably transform its food system and ensure greater food security and nutrition for its people.
Let me welcome next His Excellency Gotabaya Rajapaksa, President of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka.
Fostering organic agriculture is part of a wider program. Sri Lanka appreciates the technical assistance of the Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Food Programme, and the support of other global organizations and scientific bodies in this regard. I trust that today's summit will help facilitate the transformation of the global food system to one that can better foster the health of both humanity and our planet. Sri Lanka recently restricted imports of chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and weedicides due to public health concerns, water contamination, soil degradation, and biodiversity impacts. Nitrogen emissions from overuse of artificial fertilizer is a major contributor to climate change. In 2019, Sri Lanka spearheaded the Colombo Declaration on Sustainable Nitrogen Management, which seeks to have nitrogen waste by 2030. We look forward to more countries joining this initiative.
The results were devastating and threw the country into chaos. Sri Lanka's backbone commodity, tea, suffered $425 million in losses. Millions were subjected to rolling blackouts and food lines.
There is an uncertain future for a strategically important island nation where economic crisis has now been followed by political upheaval.
By March of 2022, less than a year after the 100% organic agriculture rule was imposed, riots broke out in Sri Lanka, resulting in President Rajapaksa fleeing the country after protesters broke through police barricades and into his house, demanding resignation. Just as Kissinger predicted, serious food scarcity was the fuel that created a fire of political instability. Sri Lanka has since rolled back their policy on organic agriculture. Advocates of organic and agroecology place all blame on the fact that it was rolled out too quickly and that they didn't have time to adapt. If we look at the case study of Cuban agriculture, there is a kernel of truth to their position, especially if the ultimate goal is to reduce human impact on the environment, even if that means human beings must live in poverty.
The sudden reduction of fertilizer caused a decline in rice production. However, this was not because the country went organic. It takes 3 years to transition a farm to organic and decades to transition a country or region, as in the cases of the successful transitions of Bhutan and Sikkim. Just stopping chemical fertilizers does not make a farm organic. Cuba successfully transitioned to organic agriculture when fertilizers and oil were blockaded.
And so we need examples. We need some sort of laboratory experiment where we can run this and see, what's the best way to do it, what's not so good, and so on. And Cuba provides us with that because Cuba has already undergone a kind of energy famine.
Sri Lanka's transition to organic was not sustainable. Its political implications were much more overt and vulgar. Cuba's transition has been much slower over the course of decades, to the point where publications can claim that they are doing so out of choice, or that they have achieved the world's largest experience of socialist degrowth.
Cuba's transformation to agroecology represents the world's largest experience of socialist degrowth. Cuba has undertaken an agricultural revolution, an ecological movement touted as a potential model for the future we all face in the impending threat of the climate crisis. The agroecological movement in Cuba has reversed the alienation from nature inherent in industrialized agriculture.
For eco-socialists, Cuba is a success story. Sri Lanka, not so much.
I want to begin with a very warm congratulations to Sri Lanka.
Agriculture experts within Sri Lanka tried to warn the government against their organic adventure, but were ignored, passed over for the outsized influence of a multinational civil society. In 1984, Indian environmental activist Vandana Shiva founded Navdanya International, with a focus on agroecology, anti-GMO advocacy, and what activists now refer to as food sovereignty. Following the fertilizer ban, Shiva and her colleagues held a webinar in support of Sri Lanka's commitment to 100% organic farming.
The reason I'm particularly glad about the approach of the Sri Lankan government is you're connecting three things. You're connecting stopping your dependence on imports, stopping the ruination of ecosystems and non-sustainability, but you're connecting health. And the minute we connect sustainability and health, organic is the only way we can move forward.
She is said to have a major influence on the decision by the Sri Lankan government to ban importing chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides, and to replace them with organic inputs and methods. Vandana Shiva has a mercurial reputation. Amongst well-to-do Westerners, she's been called the Gandhi of Grain, compared to Mother Teresa, or as Bill Moyers stated, she has become a rock star in the worldwide battle against genetically modified seeds.
We turn now from one champion of the public interest to another, global advocate for social justice named Vandana Shiva.
We need a new paradigm for living on the earth because the old one is clearly not working.
The last time we spoke with her, she was battling Coca-Cola and other multinational giants. Since then, Vandana Shiva has become a rock star in the worldwide battle over genetically modified seeds.
Vandana Shiva is the reason why there are no GMO foods in India.
She's become kind of a rock star. It's like a phenomenon.
This is Vandana Shiva. I'm Van, as a part of Vandana.
Her reputation amongst other experts in the field is not so rosy, though. When her colleagues, despite any ideological alliance, began to defect after uncovering the facts that disprove Shiva's pseudoscience, Shiva's claws come out. In 2013, environmentalist Mark Linus changed his mind on the use of biotechnology in agriculture and apologized for engaging in vandalism of field trials of genetically engineered crops.
And when you do change your mind on an issue, sometimes you eventually come out and you have to speak in public about it. Especially, I felt I had to take responsibility for the anti-GMO activism that I had previously been involved in. And ultimately, and very unfortunately, I think we did damage both to the sustainability prospects for agriculture and to the food security prospects of people in developing countries.
Linus criticized environmental organizations, including Greenpeace and organic trade groups like the UK Soil Association, for ignoring scientific facts about genetically modified crop safety and benefits because it conflicted with their ideologies, and stated that he was completely wrong to oppose GMOs. For this reason, Shiva ruthlessly attacked him on social media.
Mark Linus saying farmers should be free to grow GMOs, which can contaminate organic farms, is like saying rapists should have freedom to rape. We need to move from a patriarchal, anthropocentric worldview to one based on earth democracy.
Shiva is not shy with her use of demagoguery and histrionic comparisons. It would be easy to argue this is her main talent or useful attribute for the interests she serves.
We have in studio Professor C.S. Prakash, Director of the Center for Plant Biotechnology Research at the Tuskegee University, and Dr. Vandana Shiva, Director of the Research Foundation for Science, Technology and Ecology. How would you respond to this charge that you're working for the interests of the Western farming lobby?
Unfortunately, it is the genetic engineering group that is working for the global corporation.
But you're not asking the question I asked you. Are you working for the Western farming lobby? I will ask them what they're working for.
You're told I work for myself, and I try my best to serve Indian peasants.
Now let me ask him the question. Are you working for the multinational feed company?
No, not at all. I work for myself and for my university. And I personally feel that this technology is so pro-farmer. And so somebody who is working for the peasants should allow for the choice for the farmers to decide for themselves.
Dean of Tuskegee University, Dr. Channapatna Prakash, has served as a professor of crop genetics. He's been described as having done more than anyone else in academia or industry to promote agricultural technologies that can help feed the world's growing population. He's also spent decades debunking Vandana Shiva. Shiva believes the Green Revolution was a violent one, and that by shifting the focus of farming from variety to productivity, the Green Revolution actually was responsible for killing Indian farmers, despite the fact that the exact opposite has been proven.
Green Revolution is a phenomenon where we had a tremendous increase in agricultural production in many places of the world, including India, Pakistan, Philippines, and some of the other places that followed later, starting with a huge jump in the production of wheat and then followed by rice. And this was primarily made possible by the work of Dr. Norman Borlaug. In fact, Norman Borlaug is credited to have saved about 1 billion lives.
1 billion people are hungry. And the industrial system is at the root of hunger. The Green Revolution was at the root of destruction of nature.
Trying to paint the whole Green Revolution as a failure, and it was detrimental to Indian farming. It's a complete mischaracterization of what happened.
We can produce 2 times the food India needs. We can produce 2 times the food the world needs if we go ecological.
If we go back to her ways of farming, we can feed about maybe 3 billion people.
Millions would have starved to death in India had it not been for the Green Revolution. Perhaps Shiva was channeling Malthus's disappointment from beyond the grave.
By nature, the organic farming is very low yielding.
There is no way going to feed 8 billion people without synthetic fertilizer.
Jusper Machogu is an agricultural engineer and farmer in Kenya. He is an outspoken advocate for the right of African nations to leverage fossil fuels to develop their countries, lift people out of poverty, and prevent famine, just as it has been done in Western countries since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution.
My name is Jusper Machogu, a small-scale farmer and an agricultural engineer from Kenya. And my message is, Africa needs fossil fuels. We need fossil fuels to better our lives. We need fossil fuels for economic development. You guys preaching to us, the Western governments and environmental organizations preaching to us about climate change, we have far bigger problems. We have people sleeping hungry. We have people who are very poor. We have people without electricity. We have people who don't have access to clean water. Those are our big problems.
Many people in the Western world have little awareness of the ongoing era of colonialism, or neocolonialism, that is preventing Global South nations from leveraging their own natural resources to develop and lift themselves out of poverty.
We are going to say no to neocolonialism in the name of climate change.
But those who do become tuned in are intercepted by influencers like Shiva, who have inserted themselves as the representative voice of less fortunate nations to bleeding heart Westerners.
We should set that as an agenda by 2020, that every one of us, from our homes, from our communities, from our states, from the bottom up, say goodbye to that destructive system and say, we don't need you, we will not give you support, we will build our alternatives.
Because of the incredible damage she has done and continues to do and gets away with it, a lot of people have bought into her bullshit.
In the West, especially Europe, we have these young environmental activists who have been brainwashed to embrace organic farming.
And that's where Vandana Shiva has done a great damage, because she's not blocking many of the innovations in America. She comes and gives a lecture and makes $100,000 in many of our universities, but our public policy is not much impacted by her. But what is happening is, unfortunately, many of the policymakers in countries such as in Uganda, Philippines, have listened to her and have implemented policy to their own detriment. They are literally shooting in their own foot by listening to people like Vandana Shiva. Of course, our biggest noticeable impact has been in Sri Lanka, where the president of Sri Lanka very stupidly decided to ban all modern chemical inputs into farming and send Sri Lanka into a tailspin of economic catastrophe, where a country that was almost like a medium income country is now starving. Africa as a whole continent with 1 billion people, they're about 20% of the world population, and they use something like only 3% of the fertilizer. Okay, it's one of the reasons why there's a huge food security problem across Africa, simply because African farmers don't have access to better seeds.
The African population, about 60-70%, rely on agriculture for livelihood. Improving agriculture is one of the easiest ways to improve these people's lives. At the same time, we need cement, we need steel, we need plastics and fertilizer.
They don't have access to better controls, inputs to control plant diseases and pests. And of course, they also don't have access to infrastructure like roads and credit that are very critical for farming.
When I say fossil fuels for Africa, I say energy for Africa, I say cement and steel for Africa, so resilient structures when it comes to climate and weather elements. I'm saying plastics for Africans, and I'm saying fertilizer.
And so the solutions to problems plaguing agriculture and economy in the developing world, solutions are not different from what made the West so prosperous.
I want my people to be fed. I want my people to develop. I want a good future, a developed Africa, an Africa that doesn't need aid, Africa that stands for itself. I want a flourishing Africa.
And we cannot afford to ignore science in agriculture, just like as it with medicine or any other areas of life today. And what I think Vandana Shiva and many of her cronies are trying to do is to simply to take us back in time, when to paint a very romantic notions of past agriculture. And that is, I think, is going to be very damaging.
Experts who are critical of Shiva often cite her ideological outlook for what is guiding her promotion of pseudoscience that is clearly having a negative impact on the developing world.
Well, her ideology is one that is based on anti-science and one that is based on the very romantic ecological notions of pristine environment, and that we could continue to produce food without doing any damage to the environment.
And there are no tools causing more threats to the biodiversity of this planet than tools of agriculture in industrial models. Industrial farming is the single biggest destructive force on the planet today.
Now, she's very ideological, so she's far from being scientific or rational in her arguments, and she doesn't even have a science background. She just claims, and she kind of uses science in a very metaphorical sense to win some of the arguments for her.
The soil itself is a living system. It's a living organism. As the earth is a living organism, she is called Gaia. James Lovelock, a NASA scientist, when he realized she manages her own temperature, she created the monsoon. But when there's climate change, there's a rupture. I call climate change the metabolic disease of the planet.
And so she paints that any operation that modern agriculture does, whether we use modern varieties of croplands, whether hybrids or genetically modified seeds, or if we use any chemical control mechanisms or use of chemicals on the farm, including herbicides, to practice zero tillage, for instance, or to the use of pesticides to control diseases and pests, she says that all of them are detrimental to the traditional way of doing farming, and that we must go back in time, practice the traditional ways of farming. And it paints a very, very rosy picture of that. The peasant farming is what she advocates, and that's exactly what we don't want to feed the 8 billion people that we have in the world today.
When reading Shiva's work, one is bombarded with capitalized phrases like big food and the poison cartel, with very loose factoids and statistics scattered in between. What Shiva is selling is very clearly ideology, dressed as science, without any actual concern for it. While most organic farming advocates will admit that their method is not capable of feeding the world, and are well aware of the method's limitations, Shiva is relentless in asserting that it is. And her fortitude has paid off. Thanks largely to Shiva and her Navdanya NGO, India does not allow the use of GMOs except for cotton.
I have worked with many states of India, 7 of them, but the state that actually wrote laws and policies to make itself the first state in India to be organic is the state of Sikkim.
And if she had gotten her way, fertilizer would be banned as well.
Fertilizer should never have been allowed in agriculture. I think it's time to ban it. It's a weapon of mass destruction. Its use is like war because it came from war.
To an untrained ear, Shiva's rhetoric is very convincing. She is cunningly talented at calling back to historical motivations of an evil empire that's been responsible for crushing humanity under the boot of poverty, exploitation, and genocide for hundreds of years. But one has to ask, why does she insist on rerouting the blame from this evil empire and instead place it at the feet of modern technology itself?
Food is a weapon. When you sell real weapons and arms, you control armies. When you control food, you control society. A century ago, the imperial power of the world was British power. And it was based on the control of textiles, cotton, slaves. It was a cotton empire. I realized, first industrial revolution, textiles. Gandhi pulls out the spinning wheel. Second industrial revolution was chemicals. And Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring. And we got the environmental movement.
Many would claim that the years after World War II marked the end of the British Empire. But if we take a closer look, something else emerged out of the United Kingdom in the 20th century. The organic movement began in the early 1900s in response to the shift towards synthetic nitrogen fertilizers and pesticides in the early days of industrial agriculture. Founders of the movement include Sir Albert Howard, deployed by the British to Imperial India to promote traditional farming methods to Westerners. Lady Eve Balfour, niece of Lord Balfour and co-founder of the Soil Association with members of the British Union of Fascists. Rudolf Steiner, Austrian theosophist, Gnostic cult founder and creator of biodynamic farming. Rachel Carson, author of Silent Spring, responsible for the international ban on DDT, a chemical that safely and effectively eliminates malaria-carrying mosquitoes. And Jerome Irving Rodale, an American acolyte of Albert Howard who founded a publishing company and Organic Food Institute.
Albert Howard, who was sent to India in 1905, and his book, An Agricultural Testament, is the inspiration from the organic movement everywhere. It led to the creation of Soil Association in England, the Rodale Institute in America, and Eve Balfour and the others got together and created IFON.
IFON, the International Federation of Organic Agriculture Movements, is the global umbrella body for the whole organic sector. They are the international body that decides what organic is.
And this is why your decision to go 100% organic is central to the future prosperity of the Sri Lankan farmers and Sri Lanka as an amazing country that has stood its ground for centuries.
So I would say if somebody wants to wage a war against some of these small countries and want to bring them down, they don't have to attack them. They just have to unleash Vandana Shiva on them.
So let's work together and make sure that from organic Sri Lanka, by 2030, we make an organic world.
How do shameless charlatans like Shiva gain access to megaphones and foundation funding? The answer is as old as time itself. Having friends in high places, Royal Highness even, counts for a lot.
Ladies and gentlemen, I was most touched and flattered to have been asked by Dr. Vandana Shiva to deliver this year's Albert Howard Memorial Lecture, organized by Navdanya in tribute to two remarkable men, Mahatma Gandhi and Sir Albert Howard.
King Charles, perhaps the world's best-known critic of modern life, has for years denounced transgenic crops.
Food with a centre-page article in the Daily Telegraph, in which he said that genetically engineered crops reduced consumer choice and threatened the environment. One of the leading companies in the field, Monsanto, which started a big publicity drive for so-called GM food at the weekend, says the new crops are better and will cut the use of pesticides.
Prince Charles is Britain's most famous organic farmer. He doesn't use chemicals to kill insects or weeds. Now he's on the offensive over genetically modified crops. He said it before, and today he says it again, this time in an article in the Daily Telegraph. He says putting genes from one species into another, with which it could never naturally breed, raises crucial ethical and practical questions. He goes on, this kind of genetic modification takes mankind into realms that belong to God and God alone. We live in an age of rights. It seems to me that it's time our Creator had some rights too.
Shiva too invokes religion in her assault on agricultural biotechnology. She has a particular one-liner that almost always plays well with her target audience.
And that's why I often also say, for Monsanto, GMO is nothing less than God move over. Out of the way. Now we'll parade as being the creators of the universe.
And GMOs, in fact, translate into God move over, we are the creators now onwards.
So I joke and say for them it became GMO means God move over. And
GMO means?
God move over.
God
we are
move
our
over.
creators.
Okay.
We are the creators of life.
The new God.
Yeah.
So I always say GMO in the language of the Monsantos of the world means God move over.
And sometimes when people get very confused about intellectual property and what is it and how does it work, I say just remember GMO means God move over. We are the creators. We have created life. And now onwards we should get the rents.
Shiva's alliance with King Charles, King of the United Kingdom and 14 Commonwealth realms, of which India and Sri Lanka were former subjects, is more than just ideological, though it is very much that.
Welcome to His Majesty the King's personal garden here at Highgrove in Gloucestershire. The gardens at Highgrove are home to many surprises, including what's known as the Wall of Worthies. Dotted along the wall of the Azalea Walk are a collection of busts, including one of Patrick Holden, Director of the Soil Association until 2010, and the Reverend Richard Charters, the Indian environmental activist, Dr. Vandana Shiva, and the late Dame Miriam Rothschild.
To say that Vandana Shiva and King Charles have a close relationship would be an understatement. It's clear the two are in complete strategic and ideological lockstep.
I think the role he's playing behind the scenes and putting people together, at creating coalitions that start to work on a different plane, is an extremely different role. He is a monarch of a different kind. He's a monarch of a peaceful earth.
Yeah, well, Vandana Shiva is another person for whom I have the most enormous admiration, because she has battled heroically, I think, in India and elsewhere along all these issues. In particular, I think anyway, the importance of the small farmer around the world to food security in general.
Now, I call him my friend who is the peasant prince, because I think he thrives most on the land. He thrives most when he's actually farming and gardening. But more importantly, his heart and soul is totally with the earth. Yeah, and his nails will always have a little dirt when he's just come back. He's not a manicured prince. He's a dirty prince in the sense of dirt and soil being part of both his physical being as well as his soul. I think it has been very, very carefully developed that Prince Charles should be made to look like he's some kind of a loony on the fringe, only because his ideas are so sane in an insane world. The insane world would like to maintain its insanity.
Shiva is more than willing to act on their shared goals, specifically the demand of combating climate change by degrowing the world economy.
I call climate change the metabolic disease of the planet.
With a growing global population creating ever-increasing demand on the planet's finite resources, economic growth alongside unsustainable population growth is today one of the most powerful drivers behind a range of disturbing ecological trends. For a long time, the prevailing view was that environmental damage from growth in the economy was an unavoidable price that had to be paid to improve human well-being and reduce poverty. Yet, for more than half a century, industrial farming methods based on chemistry instead of biology have prevailed, upsetting the harmonious balance of nature, degrading soils. Of course, Rudolf Steiner was one of the first people to recognize the interconnectedness of soil fertility and the vital health of plants, animals, and people. Sadly, his visionary advice was not heeded, as a result of which intensive farming has prevailed and has been responsible for the destruction of much of the world's natural capital. Once again, this seems to me an approach which is absolutely in line with the philosophy that Rudolf Steiner was advancing nearly a century ago. If we can heal this crisis of perception, then it seems to me that everything else we need to do will become so much easier.
It was revealed in 2019 in an Indian State Intelligence Bureau report that Greenpeace, among other environmental NGOs, were coordinating a mass effort to halt energy and agricultural development projects. And they had successfully done so to the point that India's GDP growth took a 2 to 3% hit. 5 activists were called out specifically by name, and Vandana Shiva topped the list. She was credited with being at the forefront of the anti-GMO movement, doing this work both under her Navdanya organization and as a consultant for Greenpeace Australia. As a result, the Indian government banned foreign funding of local civil society organizations, warning that the international influence was spawning mass movements throughout the country, which posed a threat to their national economic security. According to information in the report, they had every reason to do so. The report states,
a significant number of Indian NGOs, funded by some donors based in the US, UK, Germany, and Netherlands, have been noticed to be using people-centric issues to create an environment which lends itself to stalling development projects. These include agitations against nuclear power plants, uranium mines, coal-fired power plants, genetically modified organisms, mega-industrial projects, hydro projects, and extractive industries in the Northeast. The negative impact on GDP growth is assessed to be 2 to 3% per year.
The report points specifically to anti-nuclear activism in 2011 that threatened the soon-to-be commissioned Russian-assisted Kudankulam nuclear power project in Tamil Nadu. In the aftermath of the protests, even India's Minister for the Environment, Prakash Javadekar, asserted India had a right to grow, and that unless we eradicate poverty, we cannot really address climate change.
On the global forums also, I talk about poverty with passion because, yes, we have to reduce our carbon emissions. But I have not created the carbon emission problem. It has been done by others, but I am not going into the blame game either. But the issue is, I have a right to grow. India and developing countries have right to go. These are the emerging economies. और उसमें अगर हमें बढ़ना है, तो what is the environmental disaster? Poverty is the environmental real challenge. Poverty is the real issue. And unless we tackle poverty, unless we eradicate poverty, we cannot really address the climate change issues. Or to that end, we need to grow.
In 2013, King Charles, then Prince, along with his wife Camilla, toured India for 9 days, which included a full day at Navdanya Organic Farm and Education Center in Dehradun. Charles spent nearly an hour in the company of Dr. Vandana Shiva as he toured the site that promotes biodiversity, organic farming, and the process of seed saving. After the 9 days were up, the royal couple moved on to tour Sri Lanka. The Indian intelligence report also spoke to how civil society, non-governmental organizations, activists, academics, and media work together to sway governments and national policies. A small group of activists and NGOs have at times succeeded in shaping policy debates in India. Apart from that, in some cases it is observed that in a cyclic process, an NGO is set up, funds are obtained, and slowly, with the help of the media, an image is created. And then awards are procured from foreign countries to enhance the image, after which government machinery finds it that more difficult to act against the awardee. This description very clearly demonstrates what happened in Sri Lanka last year, or even what has been happening slowly in Cuba over the past 30 years. Shiva was one of, if not the leading character, in both Sri Lanka and India's economic sabotage. But we have to introduce a new character if we want to understand how things played out behind the scenes in Cuba.
So let's work together and make sure that from organic Sri Lanka, by 2030, we make an organic world.
Robert Kennedy Jr. and Michael Kennedy met with Cuban President Fidel Castro, the man who was their uncle's most bitter Cold War enemy.
Castro almost completed construction of a nuclear power plant, which gives people a lot of concern. Cubans are all on bicycles now, because there's no oil in the country.
The role he's playing behind the scenes and putting people together.
When the Revolutionary War started, the British grand strategy was to seize the Hudson River Valley.
The idea was based on an old British idea, really, where they had river keepers who took care of the private trout and salmon streams for private fishing clubs.
For the first time in history, the environmentalists have standing to sue if they can show that they take some kind of a spiritual and aesthetic pleasure from it. And it opened the door to environmentalists to come into court and start bringing these lawsuits.
One of the first great battles of the environmental movement in this country was the fight over the Indian Point power plant. I work for a couple of environmental groups. I'm a senior staff attorney at NRDC. We've done a number of energy projects throughout the Americas. I love politics. Politics is what I do now, as an environmentalist.
Kissinger had said, if you control food, you control people.
I can't restrain what these thoughts entertain. Laughing their way through the dark in my brain, and it goes how it goes. But something is happening, can't say that I'm knowing, but something is happening here. Something is happening, don't know where it's going. For now, I'll be down over here.
Oh, I hope you're enjoying the view. I want my people to be fed. I want my people to develop. I want a good future, a developed Africa, Africa that doesn't need aid, Africa that stands for itself. I want a flourishing Africa.